have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV. Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hello everybody, it's Wednesday. It's time for an all-new episode of TV Guidance Counselor. As always, I am Ken Reed, your TV Guidance Counselor, and I'm very excited this week to present my guest. It is the one and only Miss Vanessa Angel. Now, most of you probably know Vanessa from Kingpin, which we do discuss in this episode, but she's been in a ton of things, a lot of episodic TV, including Weird Science, a show that I very much enjoy, and is all up on Hulu. You can watch it there now. Vanessa was nice enough to speak with me. She's incredibly funny and charming and very gracious, and I think you will enjoy this episode, so please enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Vanessa Angel.
So what's on TV? So what's on TV?
Vanessa Angel, thank you so much for doing the show.
Thanks for being here. I'm happy to be here with you.
I'm so happy to be out on the West Coast. It's always a nice break from Boston and our sort of pre-winter trip before we're put into snow jail for 4 months.
Well, at least you missed the heat wave before you
that's what
got here.
Said.
It was literally
brutal.
100 degrees. It was really
Yeah, we just usually miss out on any bad weather, which is nice.
Yeah.
So I had brought a couple of TV times for you from sort of the early 80s, late 70s, which was the last time that you sort of watched TV in England on a regular basis when you lived there. And did you grow up right outside of London? Or?
Yes, I grew up in a place called Harrow, which is a suburb of London. It's about 25 minutes from central London.
Right. And did you hang out in London a lot, or were you kind of just staying?
I did. I used to go. I mean, that's really. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I think of the things that I was doing at that age.
You would
I was
never let her
going into London by myself because Harrow was on the underground, so it was very easy access.
Right.
And
I
you
would never let her do that.
No, I would never let her go into a major, city
you just go
by herself.
Yeah, call me in a day or two. When I think back, I was when I was like 15 through 19, I was in a punk rock band, and my parents, we'd drive to Philadelphia, which is 6 hours away from Boston, for the weekend and do shows, and I'm like.
Wow.
16-year-old now, I'm like, that's a child. Why don't let them drive a car? I don't drive 6 hours away.
I know.
Yeah,
I moved to New York when I was just 17. So
which you probably felt very adult at the time, though.
You do. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think that when you're young, you're very resilient, and you don't really think of the dangers that may be.
Oh, right.
I remember my first weekend in New York. I was staying on the Upper East Side with Eileen Ford, who's this model agent. And I remember I was supposed to meet someone in the sort of Times Square area, so I walked at night from the Upper East Side to Times Square, and in 1983 it wasn't the safest place, and I was completely oblivious to any sort of dangers.
Oh yeah, that's like Escape from New York era New York City.
Yeah.
But, I mean, London was, especially in the 70s, early 80s, was not the safest place either in some spots, but compared to New York, it seemed almost quaint, I imagine, where you could kind of go and it wouldn't be as sort of dangerous feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I never really felt, and actually when I first got to New York, I felt like, when you go to a certain place and you feel an affinity towards it, where you just feel like you're meant to be there. Mm-hmm. And I remember driving from Kennedy Airport to the city, and you see the skyline of New York, and I actually had gone there originally just to spend a summer there for modeling. And I just remember thinking, I am never going to go back to England.
Right. I'm here, and
I'm here, and I just felt that this. It was they say you have 5 major cathartic moments in your life, and that was one of them. That was one of them, and I really and then I never did end up going back to England to live.
My wife is British and from Stafford, but we met in London, and it's interesting the sort of friends that I know that are English that move here for comedy or just for whatever reason that are I never go back. But it's not any sort of animosity towards them. They're like, why would you go back? It's
I mean, I like to go back to visit my mom's or my sisters there, and my niece and nephew, but I could never really imagine living there. Although it's changed a lot. Now it's very diverse. When I left there, it was kind of, stodgy, kind of British. It wasn't, it was starting to get a little more diverse, but it's so different now, and it's a great city. I love to visit, but I don't think I could live there again.
It's I feel like we always say that like you can have a better quality of life here with less resources, just because from the space. And when like Rachel's parents come and visit, her mother's like, the sidewalk, it's just so wide. There's so much room.
I know. That was the first thing. It was funny. I had a friend that in town from London this weekend, and they were staying at the Beverly Hilton, and that was the first place I ever stayed in America. And I remember, I was I think 16, and I remember I was so flabbergasted by the size of the cars, because back then they were still quite big.
Oh yeah.
And the width of the streets, because in London and in suburbs, everything is like everything's very tight.
So the first place you came to LA. Was the first place
I came to LA with my mom and my sister. It was a sort of little vacation, and it was the first time I'd ever been to the States. And then I moved to New York. Well, I didn't intend to move to New York, but I was invited to New York by Eileen Ford to do some modeling in 1983, and then I ended up staying. Because
New York is maybe as close to London as you can get in America.
Yeah, it's still a very metropolitan city.
Right, so that seems like an easy transition, but I imagine like LA is almost as opposite from London as you can get.
It is, and plus because you can't really do anything without driving here.
Right.
And I'm actually, when I first moved to LA, I didn't drive, so that was really bad.
My wife still doesn't drive. And when we come visit,
it's really difficult if you don't drive.
It's not a walking city.
No, and it's so spread out, and there's not really a center, and so it's not. It's actually, I think it's a difficult place to move to. I mean, it's a lovely place once you get used to it, and obviously the quality of life and the weather and all the obvious things.
Right, it's a lovely adjustment.
But yeah, it's very, and I actually love a city. I mean, I mean, New York is still my favorite city.
Right.
And Paris, and
I love downtown here in LA because it's more like
it's more like New York.
It's a lot nicer now than it.
But it doesn't quite have that energy.
No, it doesn't.
New York just has that.
There's like a vibe that people are downtown and they're like, oh, we can just leave downtown whenever we want. But in New York, they're like, we live here. Like we learn in London, we live here.
Right.
So when you were growing up, there was a few American shows that would kind of get over to the UK in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I imagine not, maybe 10% of the stuff we had over here, but that probably colored the way you thought it would be here when you got here. And how did that measure up?
Well, I remember Saturday nights, they played a lot of American TV, and I remember the lineup was Starsky and Hutch, which I loved. And this really funny thing is that this house used to be owned by Paul Michael Glaser.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And I loved, when I was a kid, I loved Starsky and Hutch. And then I remember Hawaii Five-0, the original, was really big there. And Charlie's Angels was really big.
All the hour sort of action shows.
Yeah, all the sort of action, And
that's the thing I've found too with friends and people that I've talked about that grew up in countries outside of the U.S. is that the stuff that was always exported was these sort of action shows because they seem to translate the best. And you would almost never get comedies and drama shows less often because it's harder to guess that those will be.
Right, well, it's the same way in movies, I guess, the things that export better are the big action things because everybody can
There's no
relate. That language is sort of universal, whereas comedy is very, and plus British comedy is so specific, I think.
It is, and I think that people don't realize that now who maybe didn't grow up in the same sort of time frame we sort of did, where there was much more of a divide. And I think U.S. comedy, especially in the last 10 years, has been so influenced by British comedy of the 80s that it's a lot less jarring to see a difference now when people watch a lot of U.S. shows versus UK shows.
Right.
But here, I mean, you had mentioned earlier when we were chatting that Fawlty Towers is probably your favorite. Would you say it's your favorite comedy of all time? Or
probably, it's definitely up there. Although, I mean, I love Ricky Gervais. I love, more recently, I love Extras as well.
But he has sort of a similar, it's a very similar thing to Cleese had in that show.
Cleese had such a physical kind of comedy too, though. Like, he was so brilliant with the physical comedy.
True, which is something that definitely you don't see very often in any comedy now as much on television. It's very much avoiding the physical comedy stuff. But when you get someone like Cleese who is very smart and it's a lot about the words and the character interaction, and is still also able to do physical stuff.
I know, and Monty Python, so I grew up on Monty Python. I mean, Life of Brian was one of my favorite movies.
So here they were sort of just cult things, which is very strange because they were basically mainstream comedy shows there. Everybody watched them. Your grandmother would watch Fawlty Towers and you would watch it with your family. And here it was sort of in the late night fringe hours, you had to get it on a PBS station. So the people who sort of were into that and knew about it were almost like a little club, which one of the reasons reasons that I think that the U.S. television is less different now is because those are the people that went on to start making comedy in the U.S. later and sort of changing the way it was. But so you're watching these sort of big action shows.
Right.
So you imagine that it's all cops running around in car chases and things? Or
I guess that was sort of my view of America. I mean, and then when I first moved to LA, you know, I mean, it does kind of have that vibe in a way.
It does, you know? Really. Yeah, I mean, even for me, I mean, I grew up in Boston, which when I first moved to London, it was kind of the thing that you had said about when you moved to New York. I was like, oh, this just kind of feels like a part of Boston I've never been to before.
Right.
And it wasn't very alien. And I've gone to places down in the South in America and been like, I do not feel right here. Like it just, and it's the same country. And so, yeah, I could see that being like, when I come out here to LA, I'm like, yes, it is very much like all those shows that I watched growing up. It's not like, no, it is like that. It's very, very strange. And is also sort of very familiar because you'll drive by something and be like, oh, I recognize that from, where do I know that from?
Right.
Which is odd. And so you started modeling when you were 16? Yeah,
well, I actually started at 15 in London, and I used to go to Paris and Milan. I was still at school, but I you know, Europe is so accessible that you can go to Paris literally for a day and come back.
It's like going to Chicago or something.
Right. So I started sort of I just fell into it, and
did someone just sort of see you?
Yeah, I was literally sitting in a restaurant. I was just turned 15, and I was with my mom, and these two women were like staring at me, and I thought this was really strange. And then they came over and said, oh, you know, we run this model agency, and we think you have the right look. And this was sort of the Brooke, you know, around the center. Brooke Shields, and that sort of schoolgirl model thing was very in. And so, and I'd never, honestly, I mean, I was very tall and sort of gangly, but I never thought of myself as, you know, model material. But they took their card, and my dad sort of checked them out, and they happened to be like this really great agency. So, and I think I was it was like the Easter holidays or something. You get like a month off of school there. And so I went to see them, and they sent me on a couple of go-sees. Right. And the first photographer who ever took a test photo, when you first start modeling, you do the test photos. It was Mario Testino, who's now like the biggest photographer ever. Right. And he used to live in London, and he would, you know, at that time he was. So
you kind of got like a right place, right time, like over and over.
Yeah, and then another photographer called Terrence Donovan really took a shining to me. So then I started working right away, and then I sort of just, you know, just fell into it.
And your family, like, were they very? Was that completely bizarre for you? Like, were there no performers or anything like that in your family?
No. I mean, my mom loved the theater, and on my dad's side, they were all professional musicians, but more classical, but not really, you know, in the acting world. But yeah, I mean, they were very conservative kind of, you know, people, and when I think of like what they let me do, because I keep thinking of my own daughter, like, would I want her to do that at that age?
Just go to LA,
just go to New York, go to Paris, I mean, they were very sort of trusting for, you know, I mean, and I think that, you know, even though you think you're very mature, and I mean, and you're very resilient, and you're not really afraid of much, at least I wasn't afraid of much at that age, you are young, you know, and so you are impressionable, and I think it does, you know, and I think I kind of paid the price for some of those experiences later on. Like, it wasn't until I hit my mid-20s that I thought, you know, sort of realized that, you know, you're not really mature, and, you know, you're really thrown into an adult world.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're not really mature enough to handle it, even though you think you are.
Right, which is almost worse, because because then you tend to get yourself another, you know, I can do this.
I mean, I grew up too fast, and I mean, I was actually very good at school. I mean, I got straight A's, and I, you know, kind of wish that I, in some way, looking back now, I not that you should regret, but like, I do feel like I would have liked to have gone to university and maybe continued I mean, I got an education in the real world. Right,
which is different, though.
Which is very different.
I mean, I have similar things, too, obviously very different, but ultimately I always try to, it's hard to sort of separate where you are now, which I presume you're happy. You seem very happy, as am I. Yeah. And you go, oh, every single thing that happened is a result of that, whatever it was. So it's kind of hard to parse them out as much as we'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe somewhat in destiny, and that, like, things happen the way they're supposed to, and that was, you know, and the same with the acting, it kind of fell in my lap too. So, you know, you look back and think, well, that was just meant to be my path. Right. You know, I mean, I used to do all the school plays, and I really loved drama, but it was never something I thought of as a career. I mean, in England, it's much more,
it's more formal.
It's more formal.
Yeah.
And, if you're into that, you go to RADA and you do. And I mean, it's not like something here where everybody who's
I'll give it a try.
wants to go into it because it seems like an easy way to make money and fame or something, which is even worse now than ever. But
it seems like
in England, it's you do your repertory and it's
you're
a couple
trained.
career.
Yes, absolutely. It's almost like I'm going in to learn how to do carpentry. Like I'm a master carpenter, I'm a master actor. And here a lot of times you get you look right, we'll hire you, and then we'll try to figure out how to make you act.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and that really essentially happened to me, even though I had done my school plays. And I mean, and I remember doing the Caucasian chalk circle at age 11. So it's like the drama teachers there are very into, you read Chekhov and Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah.
You read Shakespeare from beginning at age 8 or 9.
Right.
So
which is so different from the U.S. educational system. And you also seem to be on a career path sort of earlier in the UK because you're done with school at 16 generally, and then you do A-levels.
You finish sort of the equivalent of high school at 16. You do O-levels, and then you do 2 years A-levels, and then which allows you to go to university.
Right, which is always much more focused. Like I remember when I went to college there, and I transferred after going here, and here when you go to college, it's like here's a bunch of stuff you aren't interested in that you have to take about all this stuff.
You don't even figure out your major for a while.
But then they're like, all the classes you take are about the thing you're learning.
Yeah, well, when you do A-levels, you do 3 subjects usually, and if you want to do law, you do Latin and English, and you do specific things. Yeah, but then I guess you have to kind of zero in on what you want to do earlier there. But so I do kind of wish that I had. Had more of a formal
What do you think you would have got into if you didn't?
Well, I mean, I was interested in a lot of things. I mean, I liked history and English, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I have to be a doctor or something. But I think, I mean, I had a good brain for studying, so I just sort of, sometimes sometimes now when you have to fill out forms and what was your education, and you're like, I'm almost embarrassed
because it's not on paper.
No, it's like I left school, equivalent of high school, and it's just seems
It's like you want to carry around this 3-sheeter you can just staple to the thing. Let me explain. Here it is.
Right, I know exactly. And for my daughter, I really want her to go to college because I just and I think it's you sort of learn about yourself in the sort of normal transgression, whereas when you're thrown into an adult world, it's
much more accelerated.
It's just much more accelerated. And I was kind of got my opportunity as an actress, and I wish that I had had that sort of RADA training, or because the thing is when you're thrown in and you get an opportunity because of the way you look, it's sort of unfair because then you get sort of scrutinized for, but you haven't.
It's
had
you pursued it, but you did. It's you wanted to do this, and it's no, you asked me to do it,
and so sometimes you're not really ready for it, or you have. I mean, some people are just naturally sort of gifted and having a natural ability, but I think if you're judged on a performance, that because you get from the way you look, it's not really fair.
And it's a very high-profile business. It's not like your first time out. A lot of people are going to see it, and it's you're learning as you go.
Right.
And I do stand-up comedy, and it's a sort of similar way where it's impossible to practice it without people watching it, which is really weird. If you were learning guitar, it's I just got this guitar, so I booked a show, and I'm going to practice my scales with the whole crowd of people that are watching me.
And you can't practice comedy, stand-up, unless you have an audience to figure out what's working and not working.
And even acting is a similar way where it's you kind of don't know until you're doing it.
Until you're doing it, I know.
So you and you can't say if someone offers you this opportunity, you can't be like, can you ask me in 2 years? I'd like to really just practice first. Was Spies Like Us the first thing you did?
John Landis had seen some photos of me, and he was actually in London at the time, and I happened to be in London. It was Christmas holidays or something, and he'd seen some photos of me and had asked me to come in to meet him for Spies Like Us, and I hadn't read the script, I didn't know anything about it. I just met him, and he thought that I had the right look for the Russian Russian girl, and so literally I didn't hear right away, but then I met him a couple of months later. And then I got the part, and I just was sort of thrown right into the deep end. I guess I'm
an actress now that I had never thought about.
It wasn't a very challenging role. I mean, there was hardly any dialogue, and
but it's comedy though, which is
window dressing. But
tough.
and Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd were, really big at the time.
That was the height of their movie fame, and that was a big movie.
It was a big movie. I mean, it was like a huge budget, and we shot at Pinewood Studios and in Norway and a little bit in LA. So it was, and I kind of naively thought that was like how all movie experiences
it's all a big budget studio movie.
Yeah. So that, so I sort of, got my feet wet doing that, and obviously it was so exciting. I mean, I just loved it. So I was sort of hooked at that point. And then, from that, I got to be with William Morris, and I mean, that was a tricky thing too, because, I got signed right away by a huge agency, and they're sending me out to meet like on major projects for that age. I mean, I was only 18, but for that age range, which was actually a lot of, John Hughes, and there was a lot of sort of late teen things at that
So you went out for a John Hughes movie at that time?
I remember I went out for Weird Science.
Really?
Yeah.
Very strange.
I mean, it was like right at that same time.
Yeah. Was it the same role? Or one of the girlfriends?
It was the same role. No,
That's very strange.
Yeah, I know. So there was a lot going on for 18 at that time, but I was just not ready. I mean, I was not ready for it. I mean, I wasn't ready, and so I realized that I needed to study, and I met this casting director called Bonnie Timmerman, who was a big casting director, and she got me with this teacher called Sandra Lee, and Sandra Lee actually was associated with the Actor Studio. Okay. So I actually went to the Actor Studio for 3 years.
If you're going to learn, go to the top.
Oh my gosh, it was like thrown in the deep end. It was actually kind of brutal. But I learned a lot, and I went out on, I realized that I didn't even want to go out on big things at that point, because I didn't want to embarrass myself.
A lot of people would not have that sort of foresight I think people would just go, you hear so many stories about actors that go out for stuff that they're not ready for, they're not even qualified for, and it's like, we need you to do stunt driving this. I can do it. And then they're like, I'll figure that out later. I can ride a horse. So I think it says a lot about you that you were kind of like, I really would rather make sure that I know how to do this before you hire me to do this job. I don't want to build that bookshelf if I know it's going to fall down in 2 days.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think I fell on my face a couple of times in some auditions. I remember, what was the movie? I think it was Big Trouble in Little China.
Okay, John Carpenter.
Right. And I remember reading the script, and I really didn't, I just was so naive. And I remember thinking it was kind of like a crazy ending that was, that, to me, I didn't really believe it. And I remember going in and meeting with John Carpenter, and just, he's like, what do you think of the script? And I was like, well, actually, and I sort of critiqued his script.
It's a little crazy and unbelievable.
And he didn't even have me read. I was like, he was so insulted, but I was so naive that I didn't realize.
Why did he ask me if he didn't want to know?
I know. And my agent was like, you never do that. You never tell them exactly what you think about it. You won't, and so.
But that's so counterintuitive. Why would you think, he asked me a question, I should probably lie?
Well, I think you can do that if you're a big established star, but at the stage I was at, you don't do that apparently.
But you were being seen by in the mid '80s. All of the major directors. John Landis was at the absolute height of his powers, and he had just come off the Thriller video, and I assume he was in London finishing American Werewolf, which ended up being a huge movie, maybe 83, 84-ish.
It was 85. I met him in 85. So I'm not sure why he was in London. I think he had spent some time in London for that, but I don't know why he was there. But
and Hughes and Carpenter. These are just all the big movies in that time. So that's exciting, but also I feel your pain of terror as you would go in for these things, especially when you're kind of thrown into it. And I think a lot of British actors that come over end up having a lot more career first and then come over here, and it's still jarring for them because it's so different, even though they have all that sort of skill set that they've been training for years and years and years.
Right.
And you look at someone like Steve Coogan or someone like that's a big star, and they come over here and it's difficult, and that's with all of this experience and background.
Right. Exactly.
So you said you have one sister, or is it older sister?
Yeah, I have an older sister. She lives in England. She's a teacher. She actually teaches at the American school.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So when you guys were growing up, did she sort of control the television and what you watched, or were you did you have sort of negotiations?
I remember sometimes during the week, I didn't really watch much TV during the week, but once there was a special show that one of us liked. We would be able to watch it like having dinner.
Okay,
there was a TV in the, but the main TV was like in the lounge.
Right,
Call it
right.
the lounge.
Come through the lounge.
Right. And so that was more. I remember my dad, like, he loved Doctor Who and Star Trek. So I guess he was a bit of a, like, I don't think he was a sci-fi guy, but I guess he was. I mean, he liked those two shows. And I remember Doctor Who was on Saturday and Saturday afternoon, and the whole family would watch that. But I don't really remember, like, who had come. I mean, I don't think we even had a remote, maybe.
No, you wouldn't.
It was like,
and also
got up to turn.
As you had mentioned, there was 3 channels forever, and then you kind of got a 4th, like, right around the time you left.
Yeah.
And one thing that was shocking to me when I lived in England, and this was, 10, 15 years ago, was television was not, I think it is now, but it was not 24 hours.
No,
like, it definitely wasn't.
It would go off at midnight. I mean, I wasn't up that late as a kid, but like I remember, and then you got the fuzzy lines.
Yeah.
At a certain point. I remember my first. Like my first TV watching was when I was really like a toddler, and there was a show called Watch with Mother.
Okay.
Which was on like in the late mornings, and they had the show called Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men.
Was it like a Blue Peter, the Watch
and
with
there was
Mother kind of thing?
Blue Peter was on at like sort of 5 in the afternoon, so I would watch that sometimes when I got home from school, and that was sort of like how it's sort of how to do things.
Right. Let's make a Christmas ornament.
Yeah, it was like good for like being a brownie or something.
Because it seemed like daytime TV in the UK, and obviously there's a lot less channels as we mentioned, but it was so much more aimed at children. Like they kind of knew
that really
children are
wasn't.
here.
Yeah.
It's all children's shows. You had like Rainbow and that kind of stuff. And what was the other one? Magpie was sort of the Blue Peter.
I don't remember there being adult TV on during the day. I remember my coming home and my mom would watch like Wimbledon in the afternoon when that was on, but I don't remember I don't think there was like soap operas or anything like that.
Well, I think you had like Coronation Street.
Oh right,
but that was
on
still
at night,
right, which is so much different than here. Because I remember, kids here, you have sort of the I'm homesick from school memories where it's like it's game shows, and then once the soaps come on, I have nothing, and the kids shows are off at like 8:00. But some of the channels in the UK didn't even start till 8:00 in the morning. There was no early morning stuff.
Right.
So it's definitely a different perspective of we know who's home during the day. It's children. They can watch these kind of long kids shows with little cartoons and stuff like that. And I remember a lot of terrifying science fiction shows, and Doctor Who's the one that always gets mentioned.
That was a big thing. It was on Saturday afternoon, and I remember we would all watch that. And then we had the Daleks. I remember. I remember being terrified as a kid.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Have you watched the new one with your daughter or anything?
I haven't actually, to be honest. No,
yeah.
She's not really. She's into like watching sports.
Interesting.
She's very athletic, so she's not really into the sci-fi things.
Because there's so very few shows that are still on that people watched with their parents. And that show is the longest running television series in history right now. It's been on for, I think this is the 50th anniversary.
Oh my gosh,
so it's been on for 50 years, which is very, very unusual.
Wow.
And it's strange here too, seeing how big it is in America now, after being sort of a cult thing, like we had talked about before. The people who kind of knew about Monty Python and Blackadder.
Right.
The people who kind of watched Doctor Who were sort of a weird little club. It wasn't, you can't
so
go to
mainstream.
you can't go to Target and get all kinds of toys and T-shirts of Doctor Who in 1985. It's it was very, very strange. I remember my wife and I went to like the official Doctor Who merchandise store or something, and I think it was in like Camberwell or something like that, and it was like 2 bus journeys, and it was a teeny little thing.
Right.
Like, that's what you had to go to if you wanted a Dalek shirt or whatever it was.
Well, the sci-fi has gotten so big because I did a few episodes of Stargate about a long time ago now. But and from that, I mean, the fans are so loyal that I mean they have conventions all over the world, and I remember. I mean, I've done several conventions, one in London actually, a couple in London, just from doing literally 3 episodes of Stargate. And when you go to those conventions, some of them are a sort of wide range of for sort of
all pop culture.
All pop culture, but it's usually more sci-fi based, and then some are very specifically Stargate or whatever. But I mean, it's like the fans are so
they're
loyal, and they're just can't get enough of it.
With the internet and stuff now, it's so much easier for them to meet each other and really just feed into their fandom.
Exactly.
And just have that consume them in a good way. You know?
It is. It's actually. I mean, I really learned from doing those conventions that it's really a chance for people to get together and connect, and they connect and over this subject, and it's actually quite wonderful. I mean, the people are very, very, very sweet, and I kind of was a little judgmental of it initially.
I think everyone is,
right? Yeah. But it's actually I've really grown to kind of really appreciate that whole world.
I think if you look at it like this is their sports team.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not really any different than they get together and watch the game, or they talk about who's the new.
And it really it really helps fulfill their life, and I think that's great.
And the world is much smaller now. It's easier for them to kind of connect with people. Was there anything that you were just huge for, like the thing that you were like the biggest fan of, either on television or when you were that age, that you were just like, this is my number one thing?
Well, I remember being obsessed with Joanna Lumley in the Avengers.
Okay, yes.
Avengers was like one of my favorite shows, and I remember like I even got like my hair cut like her, and like the Purdy haircut. Right. And
did you watch her in Sapphire and Steel as well? Did you ever see that?
No, I didn't actually.
It's very weird. She plays the human personification of sapphires.
Really?
Yeah, and it's like this weird sci-fi.
Really?
Yeah, I think it was around the same time as when she was on the Avengers.
Oh, okay.
It was a very, very strange show that we got here for no apparent reason.
Right.
And I remember I knew her from that, and when Ab Fab came out, I was like, is that the woman from Sapphire and Steel doing comedy? It was very, very odd.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I never really. I used to love I loved Fawlty Towers. I loved all the comedic shows, but I never, as an actress, I never really thought that was something I could do.
But that's really your.
And now I'm thought of as comedy, which is it was just so strange. I remember when the TV show for Weird Science came down the pike, and I was like, well, and I do remember an agent saying, well, if you're good looking and you can do comedy, if you're a woman and you're good looking, it's like a slam dunk, it's like great, you should really work on your comedy because not many like good looking women can do it well,
right? And
I didn't really think that it was kind of like, I have my own sense of humor. It's not like I was humorless, but I just didn't think that I had the sort of timing.
You didn't think of
the
yourself
ability
as funny?
to like, no, not really. And then when I did Weird, then that show came down the pike, I was like, okay, well, let me see how I can do this. And I figured out a way to sort of make it work for me.
Right.
And I sort of approached it more like she was a child, and like everything she was seeing was for the first time. So it had that kind of childlike enthusiasm, and that kind of, that was a sort of hook that I could figure out.
When you went in for that show, did you remember that you had gone out for the movie originally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. And I remember having a hard time with the material from the movie just because I just wasn't.
Did you see the movie?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that must have been extra weird, where it's like, how do I not do this just like the
I
movie?
know, and they kind of wanted like they kind of wanted a Kelly LeBrock, they kind of wanted that same vibe, I think, because I remember my British accent sort of wasn't that strong, and they wanted me to do it with a more British accent originally, and I just thought, well, that's going to seem like I'm like copying Kelly, or like, and plus it's actually like I have to think about like doing a more British accent now, even though I have a little accent, but it's not like super British.
Did you really have to work to get rid of it when you came here, or did it kind of just naturally sort of fade? I
remember agents saying, oh, you should be, you need to be able to do like a good American accent for auditions, and so I did kind of consciously try to get rid of it, but then it just sort of happened naturally, like just because I've been in the States.
It just goes away,
Although I have friends who are British who have been here a long time too, and they still sound really British. So I think I did consciously try to do it just so that I could, get a better American accent. I would just practice all the time, and then before I knew it, I was just talking all the time like that.
And then someone's like, "Please do your British accent."
Yeah.
It's like, no, I have to
I do. Like I do actually have to consciously think when something comes along that's British.
I think the first television show you got here was maybe The Equalizer.
Yeah.
With Edward Woodward, speaking of British.
Yeah.
And that was very dramatic stuff.
Yeah.
That's heavy, gritty.
It was, and I think I was really attracted to that, going to the actor studio at that time. You work on very dramatic play, serious. Heavy stuff. Miss Julie and stuff like that. So I think that I just sort of gravitated towards that kind of thing. And plus I was actually, I was not as, I think people think that models are, are very sort of light and fluffy or something.
Right.
And I really wasn't, I was like struggling with a lot of stuff, and I liked to kind of tap into the deeper, darker
You got to
parts of me.
exercise that stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and it was actually, getting Weird Science was really great for me, because I mean, my dad had passed away, and I was just dealing with a lot of stuff, and it really helped lighten me up.
Right.
It really sort of, when you go to work every day and you're doing
fun.
silly stuff, and it's very silly, Weird Science.
Right.
I mean, it's so fantastical that you couldn't help but kind of step into that fantasy of it.
Right. And that
Doing
show,
it.
there was, I think it was the third series they attempted to make based on a John Hughes movie. There were 2 previous
Really?
to that.
Oh, I didn't know
There
that.
was maybe 4 if you count Animal House, which
okay,
it kind of worked
yeah.
a little bit on in the National Lampoon stuff. But yeah, they tried to do a Ferris Bueller, which was a huge failure.
Yeah, I think I do remember that,
And
actually,
Uncle
yeah.
Buck lasted 1 season.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Kevin Meaney in the role. And so when Weird Science came around, I remember people kind of saying like, "You're still trying to do John Hughes movies?"
Yeah, I know, because everybody said, well, it's like 10 years later. It's
Right.
like, or 8 years later or something. It
But
was
then
like,
it
why
lasted,
so
was
long?
it 4 or 5 seasons? I mean,
It did. It
was
went.
a long
it
time.
went 88 episodes, so it was like over 4 years.
And
But I
is-
think it was also because it was on USA Network.
Right.
It wasn't on a big network where you get yanked off after 2
Right.
airings if they don't do well.
And USA was really trying to branch out and do these original programming at the time.
Exactly.
And they launched
That was one.
Duckman.
Duckman. That was the same
Pacific
time as
Blue,
Yeah.
the bike cop show, and
Exactly.
a couple other things. So I think, yeah, they really were saying, we kind of believe in these shows because these are our flagship shows. But I think that the TV series is a lot better than the movie. It
Oh, really? Oh,
it really is. I think that the premise of the movie and the TV series actually lends itself to a TV series more.
Right.
Because it's essentially an update of like I Dream of Jeanie.
Exactly.
Which was on forever.
Right, and you have more time, obviously, in TV series to sort of, do, a movie. You've got 2-hour window to
Right.
get it all in there. So yeah, I think it probably did. Yeah, it is. That's how I used to describe it, as an updated I Dream of Jeanie.
Which it exactly is, and I think you had this whole generation of people that grew up in that being rerun forever and ever and ever.
Right.
I don't know if that re-aired in the UK. So it kind of was familiar, but also like a new thing.
Right.
So I think people really latched onto it. The first regular series you got was
Reasonable Doubt.
Yes, Reasonable Doubt.
Though that was only 1 season, and I had just done that right before Weird Science, so I was sort of into and I played a uniformed police
Right,
officer.
right.
It's like
Very different,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, no one would ever cast me as a uniformed police
Right.
officer, but I had read for the pilot for the. I don't know if you remember the show, but the role of the bartender who was the sort of on-again, off-again love interest of Harmon.
Yep.
And the showrunner had really liked me, but they'd given it to this other actress. So the second season, when they were adding this character, he just sort of had me in mind, which was great. And it was that was great. That was one of my best experiences, actually. I mean, Mark Harmon is the nicest actor and person you will ever meet or work with. He's just lovely.
And he's another guy that's almost was in a similar situation to you, where he was doing these dramatic roles, but then is actually very funny. And whenever we do a comedy, I would always, why doesn't he do more comedy stuff? And then he's in these sort of.
Now he's known for these sort of hour procedural dramas.
It's very odd. He's got like kind of that kind of. I'm trying to think of a less offensive word than smug, but sort of like a James Garner, George Clooney kind of wise-assy, lighty, kind of fun sense of humor that I think he made Worth Winning in Summer School, like the only 2 comedies that I remember him being in. So it's odd that people go, "You're a dramatic person to just heavy dark stuff."
It's funny how that works. I know.
And then was Baywatch before that or after that?
Yeah, Baywatch was right before that. Yeah, I did. I think that was the first job I did when I moved here, actually.
And what an LA job that is. I mean, that's.
Oh my God! Yeah. It's so I know. It's almost like embarrassing, It's
but that show was, that was the biggest show on television in the world.
I know. I remember the producer said, "This is the biggest show in the world." But my character was a marine biologist. So I was like, yeah, well, she was a marine biologist.
I think they had you be Australian or something, as well as like an Australian marine biologist. But there was some heavy stuff. I remember you were like menaced by a serial killer.
That's right.
And something else.
You really know your stuff.
I watched a lot of television.
That's funny.
Were you like, I don't even know how to approach this? Or?
Yeah, I remember doing that. I mean, because we were under the pier in Santa Monica, and it was scary. I mean, when you acting out that stuff, I mean, you do have to try and tap into the reality of what that would be like. So yeah, it's funny as I've gotten older now. shy away from material like that because I don't like sometimes.
Why would you put yourself through that?
I don't want to go through. I mean, when I was in my 20s, it was like, yeah, I just want to feel everything.
It's a badge of honor. Yeah.
You know?
I did it. Yeah.
But now, you know, it's funny. Now I'm older, and now I have a daughter, and you know, I don't know. I just don't. I mean, there is something magical about being able to feel that deeply. And I think that is one of the draws of being an actor, is that it makes you live in the moment. It makes you have to really deal with the truth of your feelings. And I think that, you know, sometimes in life you don't want to feel the feelings as intensely. Right. So
it's almost a way to get a cathartic release for a day. But then, you know, I think it probably says good things about where you are now, that you're like, I don't feel like I need that. I really don't need that right now. Yeah. Which is kind of great.
Yeah, Baywatch was interesting. It was actually hard. I didn't really care for it was always getting to the beach at early in the morning. It was freezing, and you have to jump in the water and swim. No
problem.
It was I didn't really like
the
that
most
aspect
stunts you've had to do. Yeah.
Right, and you're always in a bathing suit, and you always had to, I mean, not that I was really conscious of my weight at that time at all.
But I think anyone who has to do their job in a bathing suit feels a little weird about it, no matter what the job is. If you showed up to work at a cafe and they're like, oh, the uniform's a bathing suit today, you're just is it?
I think I got so used to that just being a model and I did a lot of commercials, beer commercials, where it was always okay, dance around, and I remember the auditions always dance around in a bathing suit, and then you'd get the commercial and there was no dancing around in a bathing suit, and I'm I'm sure
how did this work out?
It was just the casting people just they just want to see girls dancing around in bathing suits.
Which is very odd. Some guys I got an open afternoon, get me some girls in bathing suits.
I swear, I mean 80% of the commercials I would go in on was bring a bathing suit, wear a bathing suit. Sometimes the commercial would actually be in a bathing suit, but a lot of times it wasn't. And
that's that's something I definitely would not have factored. I do comedy, and I'll get called in for auditions sometimes for stuff and commercials, and they've had me do photo shoots weirdly, and so I never really consider that sort of thing because it's so bizarre when I do them. But if it was sort of the day-to-day stuff, and I mean my weirdest thing is if they have me come in playing a dad in a toy commercial, and they I remember once they paired me up with this kid who was a little Asian kid. Really? And I was this is weird, right? And so I always sort of defeat any potential that I would get there, but I couldn't imagine if they were you come in a bathing suit, and I'm what is this commercial for? We don't know yet. We'll figure it out later.
I know, it's funny. I mean, when you've modeled and you literally put through so much, you just get so I mean, I remember doing fashion shows and everybody's just changing in the back you're super fast, and it's you just get so. I mean, plus actually nudity in Europe isn't that big a deal. Here it's more sort of nudity.
Oh yeah, well I mean if you look at TV in the UK, there's nudity in primetime and swearing, and they'll cut out the violence, which is a very different sensibility.
It is. It's weird. Although I mean, that being said, I'm not I've actually never done any nudity just because I'm on film, because I always felt I did this one horrible movie. No, I shouldn't say that. One movie a long time ago, and they had a body double for me. But but that
did they give you that option? Where you
I mean, I was never comfortable on. It's one thing doing I mean, I haven't done it in still either. But it's one thing being kind of comfortable in a bathing suit, but to be on film,
moving is different.
I just felt too vulnerable doing that. I wish I was more bold and able to do it. Actually,
did they let you pick who the body double was?
Yeah, they did.
Which ones
they
did
had
you
an audition, and
that seems more awkward than just doing it.
They had a casting for a boob casting.
Oh, strange. I would be you know what? I feel so uncomfortable having to cast this person. It was just easier to do it.
Yeah, I know, really.
Very, very strange.
It was really it was one of the strangest things I've ever done, I think.
What's on your calendar? I have to go cast my boobs. That's what I'll be doing
seriously,
today.
It was, very funny.
So were you sort of happy to leave modeling and get into acting, even though you kind of fell into it, where you're oh, this feels right to me. This feels like New York now.
I always felt there was something more, because you were really just a sort of clothes hanger for hire.
Right.
I mean, your input was never really wanted, you know. I mean, I think now maybe it's a little different, and if you're a supermodel, I mean, I did very well as a model, but they didn't really I just felt like I was just a voiceless person. So when you're an actress, you're using your whole instrument, and you're, not that you always have the final say, obviously.
You can't say that Big Trouble in Little China is silly.
right. But you have, you're using more of yourself, I think.
And you were in the pilot for On the Air, I think, with David Lynch.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that was an interesting kind of experiment, that show.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I love David Lynch, and he just meets people like he does. I mean, not that I was like the chorus girl, so there wasn't really, much to audition, but he just meets people and sits and talks. You don't read, yeah. And I remember meeting him and having a nice little chat, and then finding out, a couple of weeks later that he wants you to do, and it was great, and because it's just the costumes and just the whole
it was
sensibility
the first sort of period.
It was very set in the 50s. Yeah, it was really cool.
And comedy, I think that might be even the first comedy you were cast in, as a chorus.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And that was at the height of Twin Peaks and sort of the David Lynch mania.
Yeah.
So that show got greenlit, which was a very, very different show from Twin Peaks,
really,
which is kind of like people were like, "What is happening?"
Yeah, I know.
Were you familiar with any of his work or anything before you went in for that?
Yeah, I mean, I had watched Twin Peaks, and I was, I really, and I just, and he's very, he's just very kind of humble and very like, you wouldn't really expect just meeting him that he has this amazing kind of creative mind.
Well, you
he just
expect
seems like this
dark,
regular guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were watching a lot of stuff then while you were here, it sounds like, where you're going out on stuff, which weirdly, from the people that I talk to, seems to be not the case. A lot of people don't watch a lot of things.
No, I mean, I remember an agent also saying, you need to like be familiar with like the shows that are on the air. That if you get a casting, you know what the sensibility of the show is, and that was before you could just sort of access on computer, like
send me a DVD, I'll check it out. Yeah,
right. That was before you could really do that. So I would try and watch. Get a little sampling of everything that was out there, so that I knew sort of what the feeling of it was.
Well, you'd said earlier too that when you first got to New York, you saw our TV guide and you were kind of amazed.
I remember that literally the first day I arrived in New York, and there was a TV guide on the table, and it was so thick I literally was like, my eyes were like popping out of my head because I couldn't believe how many TV shows were on. Like one day went over like 15 pages, and I was like, in England you had, at that time there was like 3, 4, maybe, I think Channel 4 was just
I think it just launched with sort of the young ones guys doing the like 5 Go Mad in Dorset and that kind of stuff they were doing.
But there was very little choice. Although I think the choices were pretty good.
It was more, it's quality versus quantity.
Quality versus quantity.
So were you just like, I need to just sit down and watch stuff for a bit just to kind of see, like, put MTV on or something, and let me see what.
I mean, I remember like really like perusing it and seeing all the and I remember discovering the Honeymooners that was on.
Yes.
Late was on at like 11 o'clock at night or something. The Honeymooners and
had you never seen it before?
No, never seen it before.
Oh, that's interesting. So you sort of gravitated to some of the older stuff.
And what was that other one? The Odd Couple. I thought that was on like right after.
Jack Klugman.
Right. I love that show too. I mean, that was like older even then. Right. That was, I think.
It was late 60s, early 70s. Yeah, with The Odd Couple.
But it was on like I think 11 and 11:30, and I remember.
So you gravitated to comedy stuff then as well too.
Yeah. I guess so. Yeah.
So you always, in things that you like to watch, it sounds like you enjoyed watching comedy sort of above all everything else. Even though you didn't think that you were probably learning this timing and humor without really kind of realizing it, or probably absorbing it anyway. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, and then with going back to Weird Science, I think that once I allowed myself to sort of have the freedom to be really silly, I remember one of the best pieces of advice. I got offered this part in this movie called The Pickup Artist right after Warren Beatty.
Oh, right, yep.
And I remember, and he was very notorious in those days. And I remember, and I ended up turning the role down because it was to play it was just like one scene, and it was, a girl that was in this coffee shop that was being picked up by.
It was like no substance.
Yeah, no, and I was like, no, I want to do substance, so naive. But I remember, getting to meet Warren Beatty through this process, and he said the best advice, he said, is that when you're on camera, you can't like be conscious or worry about how you look. For someone who had been modeling and very conscious of the camera, it was the exact opposite. And so I remember being very thoughtful of that. And when I did Weird Science, I kind of learned to get so out of myself and be silly. I mean, obviously she always had to look a certain way, but like I would really kind of throw caution to the wind and just step out of myself.
Yeah, and the plots were so crazy
silly.
that it probably made it easier to do that, because you're like, I don't even know what I would even tap into to try and spring something to that.
Exactly. You just have to sort of use your fantasy. And there was a lot of blue screen, where you'd have to sort of look into something and imagine some creature, a monster, a rocket ship, or some fantastical thing. And so I did really learn to kind of use my imagination more than diving into my real life.
Would you watch the show?
I think I probably watched the first few, but then then you kind of get then you're experiencing it, actually shooting it. So I wasn't like
get lost.
I wasn't as concerned about the finished product, because it really becomes, when you're shooting anything, it's the experience of shooting the thing and the entire experience, as opposed to what ends up on film and is the finished product, which I think is, I don't know if you find that, but it's you kind of have your memory of it is not the script, it's the whole
the perception
thing.
Is very different from your reality of it. Doing this podcast is sort of made me have to look at things differently, because I'm so used to doing stand-up, which is very fleeting, and it's sort of just a thing that happened for the people who are there, and then it's gone, and I never see it. I kind of think I know how it went, and it's always interesting when people go, who are watching it, tell you something, you're like, it's very, very different perceptions. So it's interesting to have these conversations with people, and then I go back to edit them, and I'm listening to them, and it's very different. I would imagine, watching it would be an equal sort of situation.
I think stand-up must be the hardest thing, though. I remember being in a class, and they had us attempt to do that just as a part of learning different things. And it was, talk about bold and courageous.
See, to me, I think I might just be wired wrong, because it's a lot easier to me.
Really?
And it was always like, if someone was like, all right, we're ordering a pizza, you call, I'd be like, I don't want to. But if they're like, go in front of these 500 people and talk about yourself, I'm like, no problem. So it's very odd in that respect. But at the same time, I've never, one of the reasons I always had difficulty pursuing anything acting wise is, aside from not being talented in that area, is that it's difficult for me to not be something that's just kind of me anyway. And so stand-up is very much you're being you, and you're talking about your experiences and your point of view. And it's almost the opposite of sort of losing yourself in a character. So that's very difficult for me to imagine, where the character's doing this and be like, I wouldn't do that. It's almost like, this is a silly ending. Why am I doing this? So losing yourself in the role, I have difficulty imagining doing that.
That's interesting, because I'm sort of the opposite. Like, I find it actually, when roles come along and they're sort of closer to who I am, I find that really hard. I find it very hard, like doing on-camera interviews as myself. I have a hard time being me. I'm I get self-conscious when I'm me.
Are you always like that, though, or do you think that's from
I've always been shy-ish, actually. That's my natural sensibility. I think that I'm not really a outgoing person, strangely enough. It's like people always presume that actors are like, life of the party, and I'm so outgoing, but I'm actually quite shy, and I'm much prefer one-on-one time with people, and don't really doing junkets and those kind of things are always made me way more nervous than doing a film.
You sort of have to have a politician in you to do that, and it's very different.
It is, exactly.
And I think a lot of performers, that's true of them. I mean, my family, if you ask them what I'm like, they think I'm very quiet and very conservative, and that's just because that's how I am around most of my family and that kind of stuff. But it's okay. I like speaking to people, and I like doing stand-up and stuff, but it's very, very different. And when people hear you do that kind of thing, like, tell me a joke, hey, do dance, and then it's like, but that's not what I do. It's like, you're an actor, all right, start doing acting.
Well, I think a lot of comics are quite tortured.
Absolutely.
And they have this, obviously this ability to be so funny, but then they often are quite introspective as
yeah.
well.
Well, I think with acting too, you have people who are sort of overly sensitive or unusually sensitive to things in order to recognize sort of the way that people react to things and then do what they will with it. Either write it or represent it or
Right.
something funny about it. You have to be sort of open to and aware all the time to sort of observe things in a way that's different or interesting enough.
Right.
And then also it's absolutely a defense mechanism that people develop as a sense of humor in a lot of ways
Right.
because you cope with things. So
Or it's a way to get like your parents' attention. I do remember
Right.
being being a kid, and my sister was a couple of years, she's 3 years older, and we had a neighborhood friend who we would put on these little plays for my family at holiday time or something. And I remember because my sister and her friend were older, I would always play the grandma, the character part,
Right.
the funny, silly part.
Right.
And I do remember making my parents laugh.
Which is so
I was like the
satisfying.
comic relief.
Yeah.
And, I'm talking 9, 10 years old. And I think there's a part of me that I do remember getting attention for that, and that was something that like people responded to. And so I was kind of like as a kid, more of the sort of silly, goofy one in the family. But then, when I became a sort of teenager and moved to New York,
Right.
I think I became
yeah.
more serious.
Right.
But I
As
think
most teenagers do,
Right.
let alone ones that are in a situation like that where you're like,
Right.
yes, the
right.
angst
I'm so
is
grown
coming.
up,
Yes, yeah.
mature.
Very sophisticated.
But then so I guess that that silly side of me was always in there, and which was able to tap into doing Weird Science
Yeah,
and
because you
Kingpin.
definitely, I mean, it's clear, obviously, coming from the outset, that you definitely have a natural comedic ability and an affinity for it, and that seems to be where you fit very well. So it's interesting to say, like, I don't know how to do this, because to me, comedy,
Yeah.
you can't teach people. You absolutely
you can't.
And when comedy fails, it just fails. And I feel like all other genres, if you're doing a dramatic role and it's really bad, it's now comedy. If you're doing a
Right,
horror movie and it's really
right.
bad, it's now comedy. If you're doing comedy and it's really bad, it's just bad. Like, there's no other level you can enjoy it on. It's just like, no, why are you all doing? It's just horrible.
It's
And
so true.
so you can't even get a sort of different take on it in that way. Did your family watch you in things? Like, what was the first thing that they saw you in? Because I imagine a lot of the shows you didn't
Yeah, no, I
transfer
used to
over.
have to like put everything on VHS.
Right.
Like,
Convert it to PAL and something, yeah.
to convert it to PAL.
Doesn't work in this
Seriously.
museum.
And so I'd send my parents, and a lot of times they didn't even watch the stuff. So I was like, okay.
Did it seem
They
like you were
weren't
just
really that into it, actually. I mean, I remember Kingpin came out, and I think it played in the theaters in England, and I think they went to see that. But it was kind of weird that they weren't really that into it. And my niece and nephew, they would watch Weird Science.
Right.
Like I would send them the tapes, and they would watch that. But no, they weren't really. I think if they were, if I was sort of doing Macbeth or something,
right.
like
They expected to have this real, yeah.
They would have been like, my mom loved the theater and was very, sort of like theater snob. So
Right.
I think that they kind of felt that, American TV and what
Right, it was the
sort of
nature
like,
of the work, not so much like.
Yeah.
So even if you were on like Coronation Street or something, or the Bill,
Yeah.
they still would have kind of been like,
Yeah, I think probably, yeah.
Did you ever want to be on any British television? Have you ever got offers to go back over there and do it?
No,
It seems like a very different system.
It's so weird. I mean, I really, and I've been thinking about it lately, actually, because things get really tough out here.
Right.
When you're over 40, it's like not a kind industry. And I have, I kind of wish that I had, gone to England and spent some time there
Right.
in the last 20 years and like sort of established myself there, because people don't even really think of me as British anymore.
Right.
And I haven't ever worked in London in England on any kind of British production. So.
Right.
And I think that, I don't know if it's too late now, but I kind of, part
never
of
too
me
late.
part of me would like to explore that, actually. And I kind of wish that I had before.
But you just worked with Stephen Merchant.
Yeah, I just worked with, but that was here.
Here, right.
It was on Hello Ladies and then Hall Pass. So those were two, sort of American. But I love him. He's amazing.
But as a decent bridge into things going on there as
yeah,
well.
I guess. I really probably need to sort of look into getting a British agent and that kind of thing.
One of the weird things I found, because we used to go back every year until my wife figured out that it's the same cost and flight duration to come out here instead. We can just have our parents visit us. But, I would do shows out there, and I would do shows with British comics who were very
really?
successful.
How was that?
It's interesting. So I started doing stand-up there, which was interesting.
Wow.
And it's funny because I have this huge love of television, movies, and pop culture stuff, but it never comes up in my act. And I think part of that is because I started in the UK, where I couldn't really, I had to be more universal, so my act's all sort of stories about my family and growing up and stuff that like people can relate to a little more.
Right.
And so which is one of the reasons I love doing this, because I get to sort of exercise this part of my brain.
Right.
But it was interesting, and I think it made me better at it than when I did move back here, because I was able to perform for a lot more different kinds of audiences and kind of tap into that a little bit. Plus, I think the caliber of comedian was a lot better over there.
Really?
Well, because in the 80s there was sort of an alt comedy revolution in the UK where you had like Rick Mail and the Ab Fab people and that became the mainstream. And so as a result, in the 90s and stuff, the path went this way. So people were used to sort of smarter, weirder stuff, and they expect that.
Right.
And here we had this sort of like, ooh, what's the deal with this thing?
Right.
Which was very, very different. Like the old Northern Club comics in the UK, it was almost like that's exactly what we had here, and it never went away.
Okay.
And so it was, it gave you a different sensibility, which was interesting.
Right.
But some of the really, they're doing very well. Like they have their own TV series in the UK, and it's a great show. And I would do a show with them, and they would be talking to me about America, and I'm like, I'm nothing, it's not. But I think that it has that appeal, like, oh, if I could really just make it over there.
Right.
And I do get a sense of like, it's not that it's never good enough, but they're like, it's just England. It's not. And I'm like, but that's great. I would move over there and have a TV series. What do you?
I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, there's so much they cast so many British people in all American TV now with dramas. I mean, it's like it's sort of like they're like the flavor of the month.
It's like a stamp of quality.
Yeah, I mean, to cast British people, it's like they definitely, I think, view Brit actors as just superior. They just do. I mean, they just do.
So it has that sort of gloss.
Sometimes I'm like, I should just speak in a British accent all the time.
Go back and get my elocution lessons to go back to the old thing. Yeah, absolutely. Although you would probably be cast as a villainess.
Right.
You have to do most things.
One of my friends is Alex Kingston. She came over. I mean, she's
Speaking
very
of Doctor
respected.
Who.
Yeah, she's very respected British. She came out here for a long time to do ER, but then she's working so much in England again now. But her daughter's out here, so she has to kind of like
travel
go
back,
which is very hard for her. But but she had, I wish that I had that, that kind of...
Be able to go at some point.
Yeah, I should probably look into it because, I mean, I don't know how I would be received, but
I mean, they definitely see... The one thing I really enjoyed about over there is that they respect skill so much.
Yeah.
And there seems to be less baggage with... You wouldn't be like, oh, American actress coming over and like that. I think it's like, you're good in this. That's it.
Yeah.
And I think you get that more here, where people are like, what do you think you're doing coming in here and trying to get in stuff, which I think it's hard to break out of that mentality when you get so used to it.
Right.
And Kingpin, huge movie. I mean, most people probably recognize you or talked about Kingpin, I imagine.
That's the go-to credit.
Right.
Which is great. It was and it's funny because the movie didn't do that well when it first came out.
Although I saw it in theaters, but as a
you
New
did?
Englander,
Oh
I did go see all the Farrelly brothers movies. Because,
really?
Yeah.
And it became like this cult kind of classic almost since then, which is so weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think people discovered it on television and on video, and that's kind of the setting that it played best in for people, where they could rewatch.
Exactly, and I think obviously their movie before that was Dumb and Dumber, which did really well, and then after There's Something About Mary came out, and that did so well that people started to say, oh, the Farrelly brothers, and let's go back, and that's when they discovered Kingpin. But yeah, that was
that odd for you, that role? Because I imagine if you hadn't done Weird Science and had this sort of epiphany about comedy, if they had offered you, you would way you would have
No, I would never have been. I mean, in fact, I was shooting Weird Science. I mean, I was still in the middle of doing, like, I think I was just finished the third season, and you know, I'm sure. I mean, I know that the Farrelly brothers had seen Weird Science, so that was part of the reason why they brought me in, and that there's no question that like, I mean, even though she was really the sort of straight person in the movie, I mean, she wasn't really the funny one, but it definitely helped having Weird Science, you know, and plus just the ability to be able to feel like I can handle this kind of material and
that you can play ball with
the silliness
actors. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the Farrelly brothers add a lot of that gross out crazy stuff as they're going. Like the script that I remember reading there was quite a lot of stuff added.
Right. It's very on the fly.
It's very on the fly.
And was that a different style of working that you were used to before? Because I imagine the episodic TV, there's stuff like, we got to stick to the script because we don't have
TV
time to do.
So, like, I mean, TV is very much, you can't really change a word in TV without a committee sort of deciding on it, because it's, you know, 9, 12 writers, and you very much have to sort of stick to the script. But the Farrelly brothers really kind of like to, you know, I mean, Bill Murray, I mean, he obviously
probably didn't say a scripted line the whole movie.
No, he just does whatever he wants to do pretty much. And Woody's, you know, obviously very super talented, but they would just add a lot of, I mean, I remember that scene with the mechanical boobs where that wasn't in the script, and so they would just sort of think of these funny like sight gags and things as well as.
And then some poor guy has to go build it.
Yeah,
we need this in 4 hours.
Maybe some mechanical boobs like in the next 24 hours.
I'll go to the mechanical boob store and I'll pick those right up for you.
So you had to kind of like just go with the flow with them and just to trust that it was all gonna work out.
And then you go see it and you're like, were you kind of like, I don't know what.
The first time I saw a screening of it, I mean, it was because Bill Murray didn't sign on until after we'd been shooting for a couple of weeks. Yeah, I mean, in fact, Jim Carrey was going to do that part, and then he couldn't do it at the last minute, and I actually knew Bill Murray through Dan Aykroyd. Dan Aykroyd introduced from Spies Like Us, and he was living in New York, and I was living in New York, and so I met Bill, and so we were sort of quasi friends, and I remember we went to a hockey game. I was with Peter Farrelly, and he was racking his brain for who can we get for this part.
Right.
And I remember that they had brought up Bill Murray, and I said, well, I know Bill Murray. This is a true story. Right. I know Bill Murray.
Because he's hard to get a hold of.
He's very hard to get a hold of. Like, that is really true. He has this like 1-800 number, back then he did. And so I actually called him, and I called him. This is a true story. And he called me back, and I said, I'm doing this movie, and you know, the Farrelly brothers think you're amazing, and you know, will you look at it? And I mean, and he was also at CAA, and I think that you know, there's also things going on agent-wise too. But
you can take full credit.
I know I want to take full credit, but I do really think that like there's a little tiny part of him, you know, was excited that I was doing it as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, he seems to just take work that he seems like would be fun.
Yeah, he's
and if
very
it's somebody he already knows and likes, he's like, sure.
Yeah, and so I do think it was a little tiny factor. So he signed on, and then when that happened, they kind of built up the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie.
Right.
The middle of the movie was a lot more on the road, so there was a lot cut from the middle, which was, you know, me and Woody on the road. So I was kind of disappointed because a lot of my stuff was actually cut from the movie. But Bill's stuff was so great that it, you know, looking at it now, like it totally makes sense. But when
at the time,
when you've shot all this stuff, and well, where's that great scene?
I wish I didn't call him. If Jim Carrey was in this wouldn't have happened. Your parents went and saw that movie? I imagine that would have been sort of a shock for them, that movie.
Yeah, I can't remember her response. I mean, I don't know.
Which is kind of like, I saw it.
Yeah, I don't think she thought it was funny. It wasn't her cup of tea.
No, that's not really. I can't imagine that the target audience for Kingpin is sort of middle-aged British people. Would not be the people who would see this. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I end every episode. TV Guide does not just inform us of what is on. It cheers and jeers and has opinions. So I always ask my guests if they had a cheer and a jeer for television, what would they be?
For right now?
Right now, or historically, or anything that comes to mind.
Oh, gosh. Well, a cheer would definitely have to be Fawlty Towers. A jeer would have to be...
That's always the harder one, because there's so much to pick from.
Who do I offend? Oh, God, I'm trying to think of something now that...
Do you watch a lot of stuff now?
Not too much. Obviously, I don't watch the things that I don't like, so...
Right.
Okay, what would be a jeer?
That there's nothing worth watching.
Gosh, let me think.
It probably says good things about you to not have an immediate jeer. Well, I have a list. Let me go. I've been waiting for someone to ask me this, and now that I have an opportunity.
Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm like completely blanking.
Quite all right. It sounds like it'd be nicer that if the U.S. model was more like the British model of television, where it's almost more like the Farrelly Brothers movie, where you have kind of one or two people in charge and they have the authority to do this. It's not by committee.
Exactly. It's like I just find a lot of the network TV comedies just seem so, like, you can tell that there's like 15 voices that have come in and tried to, like, so it becomes so middle of the road.
So that stuff doesn't have an individual vision as much as it could.
Right, exactly.
We need David Lynch to do another comedy series.
Yeah. I hate the way that, like, one show does well, and then so the next season, like, every network gets on, like, the bandwagon. Okay, we got to do, this kind of show.
Our version of that. Right. It's very, very weird.
Hello Ladies, I thought was brilliant, too, and I'm so sad that it got canceled.
Yeah.
That was such a great
thing. That's the thing. That might be one of the things, too, is that these great things, that stuff is not allowed to exist if it doesn't become a hit immediately.
I know, and that was on HBO, which is usually they're better at giving something a chance. But yeah, that was and there was a show called Bored to Death. Did you ever see that? That was so good. I loved
with
that
Jason
show.
Schwartzman.
Yeah,
good. Yeah, it's maybe they'll smarten up and we'll get longer series of better shows at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. You're welcome. And there you go. That was Vanessa Angel. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I very much enjoyed speaking with her. As always, you can email me at ken@icanread.com if you have any questions or comments or guest requests. I can try to get people that you want to hear. I can try to get them. I can't guarantee anything, but I can do my best. Also, I spoke with Vanessa after we recorded that, and she thought of a better Jeer. So her Jeer is Keeping Up with the Kardashians, a classic Jeer, a Jeer that I think everyone could agree with. As always, as I said, please continue to email me. Go to tvguidancecounselor.com, where you can see more information about all the shows that we do, all of the links to my guests, various social media entities, or any of their projects they might be working on, clips, pictures, all that kind of stuff. You can also like us on Facebook, and I always enjoy the interactions that happen there. We have contests, there's a lot of quiz questions, people have discussions about all kinds of things that we discuss on the show, so definitely go on there. And if we do more live events, that's where you'll hear about it, so make sure you go on there. And I will see you next Wednesday for an all-new episode of TV Guidance Counselor.
They had a casting, a boob casting.